This morning we're blessed to welcome Dr. Carol Fredericks. Carol and her husband Ken have moved from New Jersey several years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, to make Delray Beach their primary home, and St. Paul's is their home of worship. You may not recognize Carol because she and her husband are typically at the 10 o'clock service, and just sort of the reality of parish life is oftentimes, you know, we don't know so well folks who typically worship at other services. But Carol's with us this morning as part of our Stewardship Pledge Drive, and we're going to segue into hearing from her. She's going to talk about the gift of sharing, finding joy in those right relationships, finding joy in the jubilee that is ever present in Jesus. Might I say one last thing about Jubilee? The Episcopal Diocese of Southeast Florida, we have a wonderful outreach center. It's a day center providing food, hot meals, providing packaged non-perishable foods, clothing, medical care for the poor and the hungry in Southeast Broward County. And the name of the ministry, the Jubilee Center. Father Bernie shaking his head, that was the deanery he came from. The Jubilee Center, underscoring that God's favor, the year of the Lord's favor, that eternal favor in Jesus Christ, is found in the gift of sharing, in the gift of giving what we have for the benefit of others. Carol, welcome.
Be brief, be brilliant, be gone, one of my bosses always said. So I'll just make sure we don't go too long with my story. Thanks for inviting me. It's wonderful to be here and just share my little vignette of what stewardship is about for me. I'd like to go way back to West Virginia, where I did my undergraduate work, and my husband graduated before I did, so he got a job and I became a mom, and there we were in our Episcopal church, and Father Roberts asked me to speak at the Stewardship Drive, and I think I was 28 years old. I didn't really know what to say. I had no idea. So I sat down with him and said, Father, you know, I appreciate you asking me to speak. I don't think I have anything to say. And he said, well, I want you to talk about giving. And I said, oh, well, a lot of my friends here in West Virginia are in other kinds of churches, and they tithe. Should I talk about tithing? And he said, well, in the West Virginia Episcopal Church, we're more tippers than tithers. And I went, tippers? He said, most of our parishes, the basket come by and they take a little extra out of their wallet and put it in, and they kind of tip what they have extra in the basket. We don't tithe, but we work towards tithing, which is 10%, but what we do is planned giving. And I got this horrible feeling. I said, Father, I think I'm a tipper. I didn't know. Nobody ever talked about money in my house or in the church before. He said, well, that's why I asked you to speak. I thought you might want to consider becoming a planned giver. And I did. If that's what you were supposed to do, I did. So that's how my journey of planned giving began, way back in West Virginia. But we made the decision to move back to my home state of New Jersey because I finally got a job as a teacher. And although I hadn't been trained to be a kindergarten teacher, that's what I got a job as. And I loved it. And I tried to be the best teacher I could be. And I also tried to give back to my community and my church. So we taught Sunday school for 15 years. I was in the PTA, and it was going along pretty well. We got envelopes. That's how we outsmarted ourselves. We got envelopes, and we put money in the envelope, and when the basket or plate came by, we put in our envelope, and we were planned givers. We tried to increase it as we could, but we've had 3 boys, and we struggled. And along the way, I had the good fortune of having the gift of more education. So I got my master's, excuse me, and became a business administrator. And I struggled with the commitment of time that job required and still giving back to my community and the church. But I was in the choir, and I became the liaison for the recovery groups at my church. And I tried to share that gift of knowledge with my work, with my community, and with my church. And fast forward, I became a superintendent after I completed. That's my 5-minute mark. So it's not about me, actually. It's just about the story, and I'm going to try and turn it off so it doesn't keep doing that. I'd like to just say I found myself here in Delray Beach, Florida, and kindly was asked to be a member of the board of our wonderful day school, because I truly believe children are the lifeblood of the church. And I am volunteered in the city of Delray. I'm on the advisory board. If you have your house too close to the line, you come and tell us why you'd like your addition to have a little variance. And here I am again, being asked to speak about the gift of sharing. And all I can say is when the pandemic hit, to my horror, church was no longer open and the basket no longer came by. And my fear of being a tipper came rushing right back. I wasn't regularly getting an envelope and putting a stamp on. So the way I outsmarted myself was I became a automatic giver. I signed up for direct deposit of my donation to the church from my checking account. It made me feel better in these pandemic times. If church wasn't open, we could figure out a way to make it happen. We had Zoom meetings for day school. We had Zoom meetings for the advisory board. And it helped me feel grounded in these troubling times, that I could still make my contribution. I'm going to wrap up with a little quote from Oprah Winfrey. She wrote the best little book called Things I Know for Sure. And I've been reading it, and her quote about money jumped out at me. She said, "One thing I know for sure is where you spend your money is where your heart is. And be careful about where you choose to do so, because that is the emblem of your soul speaking, of your heart's greatest desire. And that's your greatest gift of sharing." So thank you so much for having me.